Tokitaraki e tū, whakateka te toronui o pai, kurua tipua, kurua tawhito. Toko ne tāne ko toko mauka, raki hiki te raki hāpai ka e tū, ko te raki e tū nei, me te papa e takoto nei. Tū mau mai te rā e tū nei, tama i waho tama o katahi. Te pūtake tame te tā mori mori nui, te pūtake tame te raki tū hā he kuski te raki e tū nei. Tāwhia ki a reho ki a tama ki te ao marama, tuturuwhiti whakamaua ki a tīna. Aumi e hui e tāi ki e. Kia ora tātou nei te mihati ki a koutou.
Yeah.
Ko tēnei te hui tō tei mō te kaunihera nei no reira nei anō te mihi. Ko te rakarakia hei whakawātia mai tātou mo te tau ki te iki mai nei. Welcome everyone. First council meeting. That was just a karakia to clear the way. Hopefully we can find a pathway forward. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you Deputy Chair Cramwell, and welcome councillors and everybody for the first formal business of 2026. I hope you have had a good break. I know actually everyone has been doing much reading over the break for the proposals, so I do appreciate the work that we've done in that time to make sure that we've got to a place where we've got to today. The proposals are complex and they are difficult to engage, and obviously over the Christmas break as well, that makes it even more difficult when people want to spend time with families. But this is a big conversation, and it is going to transform local government and democracy and our economy and the work we do for our region. We need to recognise that councillors have done a number of things over the break, conversations, reading, engagement, and also getting in and talking around what we're doing. And these are really important. And also the conversations that you've had with your communities, with Papatipu, with mayors, fellow councillors and ministers. The work has gone on, and I really appreciate the work that everybody has done in that space. I've personally been travelling up and down the region, having conversations with mayors and all sorts of different stakeholders, partners and everything. It's really important that we make sure that as many people get on the same page as possible, because what's at stake at the moment is not just the Regional Council, but it's the delivery of the Resource Management Act reforms. These are the most consequential reforms that New Zealand is facing for quite some time. And if we don't deliver them properly, adequately, it's not just our environment, but it will be our economy that also suffers. The government's own analysis has said that there's up to $10 billion of transition costs with the resource management reforms. That's what's at stake here. 9 billion of that from their own analysis is talking about being borne by local government. So whatever moves forward, local government needs to be able to deliver. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is the delivery of how we do things. And it doesn't matter what we believe is the best thing for us, but it needs to be the best thing for New Zealand, it needs to be the best thing for our region, and it needs to be the best thing for delivery for what these Resource Management Act reforms are. So these are very challenging tests. The mayors have been working hard to build some form of alignment so that we have a common objective to move forward. And it's pleasing to see through the last Canterbury Mayoral Forum that most of the mayors have some form of alignment. There's differences in how we might deliver that, but I'm really pleased that the mayors are coming to the table and wanting to make sure that we do delivery properly, because as everybody can recognise, and as I said before, it is about the delivery of the Resource Management Act, local government services, and making sure that we do that in an efficient and an apt way. So today's submissions, the three of them that we're going to be discussing, are really important, and they build the framework of what these changes will be. So we've got the three of them coming to the table. The first one will be the rates cap, and the second one will be the simplifying local government, and then we'll try and have a good conversation about the Resource Management Act reforms, because they really are the critical piece in what we need to be thinking from the future. So I'll bring the staff to the table. If they can come to the table, we've got a number of staff who have been working tirelessly also over the break, and I want to acknowledge and thank you for the work that you have done to bring together not just the submissions that we've had drafted, but also bringing together all the feedback from councillors as well over the last couple of weeks to inform where we've got to today. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much, Patrick, if you can, and Cecilia, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, if you can introduce yourself as well. Just introduce yourselves for everybody that's on the screen.
Kia ora, thank you. So I'll introduce the team. Patrick Lindsay, this is Amanda Wall from the Strategy and Planning team, who's been helping out with the rates capping proposal and doing the awesome work in that space. Cecilia, who you all know, has been working on our Simplifying Local Government, and Olivia sends her apologies. She isn't able to make it today. Due to a family emergency, and so we'll be taking all of the resource management input that you provide and working that through with her. If there are any technical questions that we can't answer that would be in her head, we'll follow up with you via email after this session. But I expect you'll still be able to have a very useful conversation on that resource management proposal. So as the chair mentioned, the focus of the session is on providing that direction for the submissions that we've brought to you, and just noting that the first submission on rates capping, the intention based on the timeframes of that submission is for that to be endorsed by the chair under delegation, and the other two submissions on simplifying local government and the resource management reform to be brought to the Strategy and Policy Committee for endorsement on the 11th of February. You're aware of this timeline. It's nothing new to you, but it's still just as large as it was when you saw it yesterday, of the number of things that are on the move at the moment, and just specifying that the first one we'll talk about here on rates capping that affects the funding of the local government and regional government system. We'll talk about simplifying local government impacting the form. And then we'll talk about rates capping, which impacts a significant number of the functions that are in place. I will also note that you've provided feedback on the emergency management bill submission, which is going to select committee, which will be sent next week. We're not talking about that in the session today because you've already provided your feedback on that through email. But I do thank you on behalf of staff for the feedback you've provided in the emergency management bill space. So thank you on that one. And noting our timeline here, this just maps out the closing dates on all of the submissions that we've been working on and the work that staff have been doing over the break to develop the submissions and the feedback that you've already provided via email on those. And that line down the bottom in green, that's the note on what the chair mentioned before of the proactive engagement that you've all been doing over the break, councillors. So as we've said before the break, that the submissions are a really key part of influencing the outcomes in this space, but all of the other kōrero that you have with your community and with mayors and with others is a really useful form of being able to influence the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve in the space. So thank you for the work that you've done under pretty challenging timeframes in that space. You were sent the submissions last week. There was a placeholder in all of the submissions for a common cover letter that sat across all of those submissions. The chair's working on that at the moment. The intention of that cover letter is to put in place some statements around the cumulative impact of all of the proposals, and then the detail of each of the submissions would refer to the proposal that one's about. So the work on that is still going through, and we won't talk about the detail of that cover letter today. But the content of it is very much drawn out of all of your conversations that you've had about these proposals to date, and the content of the submissions.
Okay.
Yeah, just hoping that we actually just get a chance to see that before it's signed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Which brings us to the first proposal, rates capping. So I'll hand over to Amanda to talk to that very quickly, and then we'll hear your feedback.
Morena koutou. I'm Amanda. Just for a little bit of context, my usual home is the strategic programs team in strategy and planning, but I used to work in Emma's team, so I've been loaned back a wee bit to help with this one. Bearing in mind I'm not a subject matter expert on this particular topic, we've also got Grant from Corporate Services in the room who can hopefully help with any particularly technical questions you might have. So in the interest of time, I won't go through the rates capping context slide. I'm sure members are all aware about the high-level aspects of the proposal. In terms of the submission itself, again, I won't run through what's on here, but I'll just to highlight the fact that The submission is based around impacts for regional councils, as this was something that we felt the proposal didn't adequately cover. So the value that we can provide in this consultation process is to focus on that. So firstly, thank you very much to everyone that's provided written feedback during the week. We've been working to incorporate that over the last couple of days, and I've tried to sort of theme that feedback on this slide here. So there's been a few suggestions around strengthening the wording or the tone throughout the submission, and that's really just to better highlight some of the key issues with the proposed model. There's also been a suggestion that the CAPS exemption process include development of criteria for automatic exemptions, such as for natural hazards or disaster recovery, so to avoid having to go through a potentially time-consuming variation application process. And the last two are reasonably linked, so there's been a theme around ensuring that rate rises remain affordable for households as well as sustainable for councils over the long term. And then, of course, just really trying to reinforce in the submission, there is a strong need for financial discipline with or without a rates cap. Hopefully that gives you a very quick but decent overview of the submission and the feedback received so far. So keen to hear any questions, understand if there's any further feedback or if there's anything that we've received so far that you'd like to discuss in the time we have.
Genevieve.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's one of those quite sort of controversial topics. So, I'm pleased that you are excited about doing it to a degree. I guess my question is, in reviewing the document and submissions from us and our comments, did you see anything, any gaps that jumped out at you as quite key risks that if we do a rates cap at a regional scale that really just stood out for you that would be really hard to remedy?
We haven't gone into great detail. It's sort of, split down at sort of specific work stream levels. But I think where the submission covers things like the joint work programs of central government, it's just extremely unclear about how those would be impacted. And I think the credit rating issue as well, that's been raised by lots of different councils and a heap of commentary about that. So there are probably two that jumped out.
Yeah, quickly.
Just a really quick comment, because, we get audited all the time for specifics in spending, yet there's really never any highlighted area that we're not doing as best we can. So looking at further restrictions in that spending concerns me that what is going to, with regards to credit rating and just overall community and environmental wellbeing, that really worries me. So thank you so much for your work. It's not really a question, but...
Any other questions? Did I see... No? Okay. One thing in the rates capping submission that I wanted to just see if we could touch on is it's a little bit outside rates capping, but it's the actual affordability of delivery. It's not the affordability, it's the delivery of services and the funding model for local government as a whole. And just... we don't need to make light of it necessarily, but it was a big part of the last government's work that they did, and that work was informed by a lot of evidence. And I think it would be useful just to mention that, in the context of a larger funding of local government, especially with whatever happens with the changes, I think that needs to be addressed at some point. So, Claire?
Are you talking about the local government review, like Jim Palmer's work and that sort of thing as well? Because I think that certainly touched on the funding stuff, didn't it?
Yeah. Ian?
So do you want feedback on the submission now?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Well, look, I sent a quick note saying that I didn't agree with the tone of the submission at all, because I thought the tone of the submission was trying to cherry pick and silo our expenditure and saying, we can't cut back on rivers expenditure, we can't cut back on public transport delivery, without actually recognising that the rates cap applies to all our expenditure without recognising that actually we spend a lot of money on things which aren't core deliveries that we need to do as part of our mandate. And when I read it, and I thought it was rather cute that we picked on emergency management and river rating, river management as examples of why we couldn't cut back on rates. But in fact, I didn't agree with anything that was written in the submission about that. I thought it showed a degree of trying to screw the scrum a bit in terms of the discussion we were having. So I think, in fact, this council could easily live within a rates cap, certainly for the first few years, because of the amount of money we spend on things that actually aren't important to our constituents, but actually we do fund anyway. I'd make the comment that, and I think Claire made the comment in one of her comments, that public transport, we have the highest rate of subsidy from ratepayers, the lowest cost recovery, and the cheapest bus fares in New Zealand. And yet we're saying that we're trying to do everything we can to, we can't run our bus service without actually impacting our ratepayers. So I think we've got to be a little more honest in our submission. I'm sorry, I'm being quite brutally frank. I've been around, I've been involved in the river management and that side of things. Whatever we call that now, community preparedness or whatever it's called. There's no question that we're underfunding our rivers, but I don't see that changing under the current model. The rates cap is not the issue for that. It's actually we need co-funding from central government. The other thing we need is less rules and regulations hampering our rivers teams being able to do the job. And I quoted in my short note the nonsense of reconsenting the opening of Lake Waihora as an example. We have a governance group of about 20-odd community groups, including every man and his dog, who sit around the table discussing that. The conservation order actually sets the rules and regulations around the opening of the lake, and yet we're budgeting $300,000 to reconsent that process, which in 2 years' time, which is an absolute nonsense. So an organisation that is willing to waste that much money, is accepting the concept of wasting that much money to achieve nothing, because I have no doubt that a reconsenting process for the opening of Lake Waihora, and this is just an example, will actually won't change anything, but willing to spend $300,000 to get to a point where we don't change anything is to me saying that we actually have lost control over our expenditure. So one of the advantages of the concept of a rates cap is that actually it might start making us and our communities think a bit harder about where we do just squander money. And so I think the tone of our submission and a submission I'll put into central government will be along those lines, that we actually have a responsibility to our ratepayers who voted in the last local body election very clearly to say that we're sick of this unfettered expenditure in rates increases. We actually want some accountability for some of that thing. And it's not, and so the tone of our submission doesn't reflect that view. And I think it should.
So you got those points there, and I think there's been a few there. So there's different views as well around the table. So if there's any other views that people want to provide some feedback now, and then we need to move on to the next steps. So has anybody else got some feedback? Councillor Ashley.
I think partially in response to Ian, and I think we all agree that most of our ratepayers do want fiscal responsibility. The submission needs to acknowledge that what is core services to one part of the community is a nice to have to the other, and vice versa. And we need to actually balance that, and that probably that balance looks like absolutely nobody thinking everything is perfect, but everybody being kind of satisfied. And so I think that debate that we need to stick to core services hinges on the definition of core services, and that varies across the community.
Anybody else? Claire, and then
Yeah, look, I think this is a rates cap. I think we need to keep it quite narrow and focused on what we're being asked to provide some feedback on. We have some statutory responsibilities around our core services, and that's where we should be focusing. It's well known that I've stood for affordable rates, and I did put that in my cover note back to staff on my feedback, because I do think there are some areas which fall outside core services, but if the community asks for them and are prepared to pay, I guess that's part of the issue. But I think this does, for me, it drives us back to the need for financial discipline, and it's with or without a rates cap, and I did actually put that on my feedback. I'm fine with this as drafted, and that's not saying I disagree with Ian's thinking, because some of that thinking I sort of do, but we do have roles and responsibilities here for the whole region, so I'm fine with it as it is.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some agreement with Councillor McKenzie, but I have a philosophical view that I don't believe in rate caps, and believe we can really end up with perverse outcomes if we have a sinking lid that sits there and we cannot achieve those outcomes that we absolutely need to achieve. And I think of the things that Councillor McKenzie mentioned, our rivers and emergency management, a whole bunch of things that sit there. And one of the challenges for me when I look at the size of this organisation and where it has grown to, so much of that is driven out of unfunded mandates by central government. So the expectation of what we will provide to others in an unfunded space requires us to take more out of the pockets of our ratepayers. So I think in this whole conversation, yep, I absolutely believe in that bottom line about fiscal responsibility, discipline, and driving those costs down. But there also needs to be a responsibility sort of pushed back onto central government and the expectations of what we will do, how we do it, and a bunch of those unfunded mandates. So while philosophically I'm against, the discipline that it drives is important, but I just have a nervousness about some of those core services. And we do define our core services. They sit within this organisation, our core services. They sit there, so it's not a philosophical thing. So concentrating on those, driving some cost out is useful, but I just have a nervousness. Thank you.
Genevieve, and then Nettles.
For me, rates caps, especially at a regional level, I feel it prevents us from meeting non-discretionary legal duties with regards to, compliance and the likes. It shifts the costs, not savings, to future ratepayers. It also undermines environmental protections. It reduces a democratic choice from the public and communities. And my key concern is that our model for polluter pays and user pays is not accurate enough to actually warrant capping it, because if we shift to actually having the polluter pays and the user pays, like it should be, 70%, 30%, all the likes, we would actually be saving money for the ratepayer. But at this current rate, we're not. So that could be something we shift fundamentally anyway and actually save the ratepayer money, because, that is the key to all of this, I believe. I don't think the ratepayer should be paying for the pollution of other people's activities. And,
Okay, so we've got Nettles, then John Faulkner, then Nick. We need to wrap it up to move on to the next steps.
Thanks,
The
Dion.
next one.
Absolutely, I think we need fiscal responsibility at the core of what we're doing. The council has and works within a diverse set of needs of have to have and nice to haves, and because we cover a huge gamut of things that we do, there needs to be an awareness of the opportunity costs of what we can't have and what we can live with. It is a clumsy tool, but it's a tool, and we need to move forward with caution, understanding the opportunity cost, and find agreement on what we can live with and what we can't. Thanks.
John?
Thank you. I listened to Mr. Sunkel and Mr. McKenzie, and I'm in agreement with both. So, but the rates capping, I think, is an effective method moving forward because it's a blunt tool that will force us to have conversations on what is actually a core service and what should be removed out to possibly another entity. I know there's the conversation about the bus service, and that would be one of probably the primary ones that possibly needs to be reviewed. I understand the concern over the rivers, etc. So I'll go back to that point. It's a blunt tool. It's a blunt tool to cause us to have a conversation, and I think that should be acknowledged in the submission as well.
And Nick?
Yeah, just support the chair's point that ECAN's done a lot of work around the funding model for local government, and we're expected to do a huge amount of services with a tiny proportion of the tax take of the country. You know, it's less than 5%, and so rates capping, I'm sure, will be a temporary aberration in the history of this great country because. But it might trigger us to have the conversations about how we fund local government to actually do the increasing amount of work that's put on us. So, yeah, I'm not in favour of it, but I am in favour of bringing in money in other ways, e.g. GST, so we can keep rates low. Yeah.
Sarah, and then we'll move on. Use your microphone.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, just with the targeted river rates, I'm just wondering whether there is scope in another forum to discuss the whether that should be targeted rates or go back to general rates, because we're looking after rivers as a core service for the whole of the region.
Long-term plan will be the place to start.
Excellent,
Those
thank you.
and that will happen immediately after the annual plan. Thank you very much, team, for that. I think there's good feedback. One piece that I think, and I was just looking for it again, is the delivery of civil infrastructure has gone up exponentially more than CPI, and they're using that as the model to base this on. So I know, for example, bridges are costing up to 40% more to build since the start of when the pandemic happened, or there's some metrics that have been put out there. If you can just find those, it might be quite useful to add as well, because if they're going to use one model, it's not even across the board. Ian, and then we're going to move on.
Well, just actually to counter that, I think you're misreading the current state of the contractors market. But one of the issues we have, which I want to discuss with our Rivers team, is that if you have a procurement policy which only includes a certain number of people who are allowed to tender for a project, you actually can put up the costs when in general costs are going down, but other people's costs are going up. And I think
that's why I'm saying that there's different measures that you could use. CPI is one measure. There's the contractor CPI, and that might go up and down.
The trouble with
on regulations.
If you have an exclusive contractors procurement policy, which seems to be part of our procurement policy, we're actually cutting out a whole lot of players who could be lowering our costs.
No, I don't agree. Okay, moving on to the next one.
Thank you. And I will mention as well, we've included some of the context around rates capping and the way in which that might change the economic environment in which the council operate, and some of the other submissions that we've put forward to you to discuss today as well. So it's included within the context. Cecilia, over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. So I won't read out this slide, but essentially what these proposals are looking at is who is going to lead the development of a regional reorganisation plan, how to go about that, and in the meantime, whilst that reorganisation plan is being developed, who should lead and govern regional council functions rather than being about the future state and design of local government. So again, I won't read this slide out, but just to clarify that the key recommendations in the draft submission is that regional councillors remain in office until 2028 local elections to provide that continuity of current regional council functions and providing stable transition to reform. And in parallel, a governance arrangement is temporarily put in place to lead and govern on the development of these regional reorganisation plans, including conversations about allocation of functions and transitional arrangements. And also, as Patrick's already alluded to, there is commentary in there about the cumulative impacts of reform and seeking greater clarity about how the pieces fit together in timeframes on that. So thanks, Patrick. And again, I won't go into detail on this, and thank you for all the feedback to date. And working through that, and haven't listed it all, but providing the further clarity and examples sort that's been provided through your feedback. But particularly keen to hear today councillors' feedback and direction on the clarifying the mandate and the make of that proposed alternative governance arrangement to develop the regional reorganisation plans, whether it should include more than one regional representatives, what the role of the Crown might be in that space, and also recognise that the proposal refers to CTBs also looking at the regional spatial plan, but we'll align that with the RM submission bills. But this is focusing on sort of leading and governance of the regional reorganisation plans. And so, leave it to feedback.
Okay, so feedback on that. I've got John, and then the other John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I got bored over Christmas, I kind of wrote my submission, and everyone's seen a copy of it. And I think we're all kind of aligned in our thinking of where things should travel to, if government is intent on doing what they're doing to get the best outcome. So making that assumption that government will do what they do, how do we best achieve the outcomes for Canterbury? My thoughts around what that alternative governance group working in parallel would look like would be at least a couple or two regional councillors, 2 or 3 mayors and 2 or 3 independents with good subject matter knowledge, change management, who might have a more formal role in progressing the process. And in working in through that mechanism, we would have business as usual for council. We would have then the change process being developed, and my hope would be at the end of the triennium, those change and those processes and those systems that would be put in place, so there would be a simple transition going forward. And that, in my mind, provides certainty for the staff on this building. People will know where they are going, what they are doing. We will know what governance looks like. And I think that my reasoning for the mix is regional councillors understand the functions that we have. Territorial authorities, the mayors, understand their functions and where things can sit, and then having those subject matter experts to kind of do the moderating through and achieve the outcomes. So that's my thoughts on the future. The rest of it kind of moot. We can think of all the reasons, but I kind of like our submission, and I think it falls into a line with a number of others that I see along the way. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to echo that, and I've been giving it a lot of thought over the summer period, and my submission is very similar to Councillor Sunkel's, but I'm probably more adamant in the position that the regional councils have the experience, the knowledge. I look at gentleman to my left here. He's very passionate about what he does. John, Claire, Genevieve. and there is a depth of experience around the council that is not held in the same institutional context as the mayors. Not saying that they're not capable to doing the job. However, I think we need to go back to the two bills, the purpose of what's happening, and look at the key first order priority, and that is implementation. And if implementation is the first order priority, it's getting it right. And the answer to that is council. We've got a chair that is recognised nationally. He just sort of falls into roles because of skills, and we've got them. So I think that needs to be pushed very, very strongly, and we've got we've got a very narrow scope and opportunity to move this forward.
Thank you, Ashley, and then.
Apologise for not mentioning Ngāi Tahu within that conversation. So just to ensure that they are in there.
Ashley and then Ian.
I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday about the roles that the proposed CTB is expected to carry out. And yesterday it was said that there were 3 distinct, fairly heavy roles. The change, proposal and management, the spatial plan, and the regional governance. But actually there's 4 because each one has also got their territorial authority governance as well. Now, it could well be argued that each of those is a full-time job. And so I think that our submission needs to be very clear that the more full-time jobs you ask one body to do, the less time and attention they have for each of those jobs. And therefore, probably the less optimal the outcome in all of those jobs. So I think there's a very clear point to be made about at least removing the business as usual regional governance over that time to free up headspace and resources for the other 3 jobs as well.
Yeah. Ian and then Andrea. Okay.
Look, I think I thought John's and John and actually Peter Scott's submissions were sort of around the areas where I sympathised, and that is that A, we've got to move forward. B, the mayors are the drivers of this and should be the drivers of this, and anybody who suggests the mayors haven't got a democratic mandate to represent the best interests of their constituents, it seems people don't understand the nature of democracy, really. And so I have faith that our mayoral forum and the mayors will actually drive what is best for their districts. And I think we need to have a regime that supports that. I've discussed it with my mayors. I know the South Canterbury councillors have talked to their mayors, and I think there's a degree of unanimity, as you said, Dion, in terms of where the mayors want to go. And it seems to be evolving around a sort of unitary or councils with more unitary functions than they currently have, and then shared responsibilities or sharing delivery of services such as river management and biosecurity and various other functions which are best done across the region. And so if you look at the functions, what the TAs think that they can take on, what central government is going to devolve or retain for themselves and take away from the current regional council, that'll deliver the structure. So how we get there, I think we need to support the mayors in getting where they want to go, and I think we should listen to them for advice as to what additional resources they need to help them get to there, rather than say, oh, we think you should be overrun by regional councillors, commissioners and mana whenua or whatever the mix is. I think we should be listening to them for advice as to what it is. And in terms of timeframes, I don't support having 2028 as the end game for us as a regional council. I think that depends. I'd like to think there will be a transition before then. My discussions with our mayors is that they should. I'm suggesting they should have the bones of the new structure in place within 18 months, which gives another year to think about what the transition might look like. I mean, that might mean that we as a regional council still go to the end up till October 28, but I don't know that we should be setting a date for that. I think we should be saying, let's get on with this transition as quickly as possible, find the new structure, get some certainty into the process, and then move on. And I think Peter Scott made the comment very, very well that out in the provinces, and it's certainly been reinforced with my discussions with the two mayors of the districts I represent, is that this huge amount of enthusiasm for a change, a complete lack of confidence in this council to deliver because of the things that have gone on that have our communities think where we've been let down by the decision making within Tuam Street, and people are sick of that. They want to have some control over their own destiny.
Okay, moving to Andrea, and then I've got a few.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good conversation, and there's good points all around. I think we just have to be realistic that we're going to go out of that. Will go people's representation. So we're doing this simplifying of local government for the people of New Zealand, so they can have a better life, maybe. But they will lose their representation. And I did have a look at, the Manchester model, and when you unify, it does favor urban developers. So I'm not so sure this is going to be great for the rural communities, but we're going to have to just see what happens in a way. But it means that we do need to be very proactive with this environmental bill. That's my only point. So, I think we put the submission, but we really need to be good with the environmental submission.
I've got Megan. No, it came to you. We'll get there.
Well, kia ora. So, look, I just wanted to make the point that this is a government proposal and not a bill, and therefore timing's all very critical because we've got this election coming up on the 7th of November, and we'll be able to see whether this proposal actually progresses through that bill and the legal process in that timeframe. But in terms of what the government has proposed are those three functions. The way I look at it is, of the three functions that have been proposed for a CTB or something else to pick up, my thinking goes, are these the right functions for the CTB to have? And if so, then who should actually be appointed to make those decisions? And so the first function is take over regional council governance, and I do agree with our position that regional councillors should continue governance of regional council through until such time as the reorganisational plan is implemented. So I don't agree with putting this term. I think it's actually more nuanced than that. When it comes to the regional reorganisational plan, I agree with the position that we've taken, which is that this must be a group of different voices coming in and talking about what's right for this region. My thinking on that, a couple of thoughts that sit with me, and I haven't quite landed, and I've still got, I think, a day to comment, so I might have this landed better by then. But when I look at the options, there aren't a lot of options in New Zealand, and there's been a lot of work already done on what the options are for local government moving forward. And so I do really wonder why 17 regions would pay all of this money to actually look at the options when a lot of it's already done and there aren't a lot of options. So I see an enormous waste of money, which could be done at a centralised level and paid for at a centralised level, and then brought in as options for each region to consider rather than do the whole work itself. But let's say there is now going to be regions deciding for themselves, which is the proposal. And my response to that is I completely agree with the mixed model that Councillor Sunkel has suggested. That leads me to say, therefore, I don't agree with it only being mayors, which leads me to say I don't agree with it being the mayoral forum. And if it actually did go down those paths, then I think we have to very quickly understand what how the voice of the iwi and mana whenua and Māori are incorporated into that. I also think the timeframes are a little bit off, but in regards to getting it all done in 2 years, I think that's going to be really challenging. When it comes to the third function, which is delivering a notified regional spatial plan that includes ecological environmental limits by Q4 2027, I have a real concern with that actually going to a CTB, that function, and it being delivered within 1 year. My view would be you would flip that and you would say, well, wouldn't you get your regional reorganisational plan in order, then whoever the decision makers are actually work through what the regional spatial plan is. And so I think at the moment, if I understand our submission correctly, it is to say that the regional spatial plan, if regional councillors are staying in role, that the regional spatial plan is to be carried out by the regional council. And I actually don't think I agree with that position. I think that's where we've gone wrong in the past, to not include other voices. And TAs actually deliver critical infrastructure, and we need to actually work together to decide what goes where, and then what the human health limits should be and the ecological limits should be. So I think that's actually more nuanced and bespoke, not the CTB, but I also don't think it should be just us.
Claire.
Lucky I'm following Megan. Look, I agree very much with what John's said. I think there definitely needs to be a shared discussion on the regional reorganisation. But I step back and I actually think this message from the government, in my mind, and I said it in my triennium, at the beginning of the triennium, is to drive amalgamation of TAs. That's my view. The government doesn't want to be the bad cop here and tell them that that's what they've got to do. So this is some way of getting a democratic decision, as I see it. If I step back to what a CTB is, I don't like that, but I disagree. Well, I've got a difference of opinion or an understanding at the moment. I think it's something we need to tease out, because I think even Megan and I are probably not quite on the same space. And I did a bit more reading last night around the roles of the particular committees, because it's quite clear that there is going to be a spatial plan committee that's going to be elected or selected, because there's some outlines of that framework in the planning bill. The decision maker is ultimately the governors of what might be the regional council, and they're calling it the CTB, because that was what we pulled out yesterday in Annex C, particularly for the regional spatial plan and the environmental work. But the decision maker, of course, on the land use one is the TA. So that's no different to what currently already happens. But yeah, there's just a bit of confusion. Well, there is no clarity actually who makes up the spatial plan or who constitutes it, and we do need people of experience and expertise on that. Because then you go into the detail that Megan's, picking up that needs to be addressed properly. So that's an area I think we need a little bit more clarity on from our plan people that are interpreting these bills, unless somebody can answer it today. But I'm pretty much in the same space as John around where we are, and I have provided my feedback on the submission, but generally happy with the tone and direction of it.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry, I've lost. Who hasn't had a Patrick, and then I think it was Sarah after that.
I just want to make a point on the spatial planning component and the connection between the CTB and the spatial plan. So, given the complexity of it, we have actually put together a little on a one page. This is what the bills say about the spatial planning process.
We had a talk about this yesterday afternoon. So.
And this was also, this was based on your conversation yesterday. Also, some conversations at the Mayoral Forum that reflect how complex some of this stuff is. The Spatial Planning Committee is under the bill, the planning bill. The Spatial Planning Committee is appointed by the local authorities in a region working together to work out what that looks like. So, were a CTB to be in place, there isn't a regional council, a set of regional council governors to be one of the people deciding whether there's any regional council representation. So it's an assumption that the local authorities would decide who is on it, and that it wouldn't have a regional council representative upon that committee, because it's just the local authorities deciding it together. In our submission on the planning bill, which we'll talk about shortly, one of the points that we put forward on your behalf was in the bill requiring a regional council representative and mana whenua representative on that spatial planning committee, but currently it's just open and says local authorities get to decide who is on that. So it's not necessarily the CTB is that group. It's an open decision who is on that with no.
We can pick that up in the next conversation. I think.
Just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's good. We'll pick that up in the next conversation. So who hasn't had a word? It was Sarah, wasn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I've tabled in my mind, how could it all work, and the process of actually implementing the regional spatial plan. So, as a practitioner, I'd like to think, well, how's it all going to work? And I'm very much, I can't see the logic of the CTB. I couldn't find the real criteria why they would get rid of regional governance. And so I'm very much thinking, agreeing with my colleagues here, that most of them, that the regional council stays as it is, and also that the local government is still territorial and authorities, and they provide the important role of public infrastructure and services, and then the regional council provides the role of regulator and manager of the environment. So, and we already have a mayor's forum. So why don't we just restructure that to be a formal board, and with the representation of iwi, Ngā Tahu in Canterbury's case, and the strategy committee members on councils, so that we have that follow through, and the other government agencies, governance in Canterbury, such as NZTA, Kiwi Rail, Housing, the new ministry or whatever that they are proposing, and also the health, so in education, that it's sort of like a regional governance board. So, and through that, the ministerial national direction can say yes or no. Politics change. We might have a 10-year plan, but in 3 years' time we'll have a different government. They'll have a different direction. So they can decide from the regional plan what is important for them to put forward as nationally significant projects. And then from there, that can go through the EPA consenting and out to a ministry of whatever, and I'm saying here, Sarah, infrastructure. So thank you.
I don't think it's useful to try and design the system, but your good points.
I think it's totally workable, and that we could get on with it from day one and get the regional plan underway. I don't know why we're having to think about
The regional plan
whole
will have to
transition.
get done. The spatial plan will have to get done. It will be legislated as
Yes.
of July when the bill
But
passes.
we
We'll
don't
move
have
into
to change our government structures to do that.
that, and we'll move into the conversation in the next.
So I'm not saying, why are we worrying about all this change? We don't need it. We've got it. We've got the structure to do the planning as it is.
We'll
Thank you.
pick
That's
that
my
up in the
comment.
next conversation. I think Nettles, did you have something?
I'll make this brief. We've got to get into the meaty stuff in about 3 seconds. So I just wanted to say I concur with Councillor Sunkel, the mixed model, the heart bypass machine, which will be absolutely needed. Councillors need to get on with the business of the moment, and the mixed model gives us a vehicle that we can look to be creating a positive future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nettles. I think that's all. Sorry, Jan.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, just I love the submission. Quite detailed, but I do love the summary. Point 4, or those 3 points in point 4. In point 4 there, cover it beautifully. So I don't know if it covers it all, but similar to Megan there, the number 78, just the really the timing regarding the regional reorganisation plan. That taking 2 years, but then also trying to fill in with the spatial plan as well. How that's probably the one point that I'm really I don't see how that's gonna, if it's work, if there's CTB in other areas. So I mean, if we have that, the model John talked about with mana whenua in it, I could see that there might be able to that clarity might be able to work. But if it's separated, it'll I can't see the connection. Kia ora.
Cool. Very briefly. Yep.
Very briefly, the last thing I've spoken was rates capping, so I haven't talked on this. I actually agree with Megan and also the mixed model. However, at the moment, I think we need to sit in our seats because we're actually driving a very fast craft at the moment. And I think we need to deliver on some of the promises that we promised our communities with the rates they've paid, and we need to do it ourselves because we promised to do so. I think actually having a mayor-led group or council is concerning. It removes regional oversight, and it also risks actually jumping in mid-flight into some of our key programs that we're already operating. And I think we also need to look at the actual role of a city council or a TA versus a regional council. They're absolutely worlds apart. And if we can come up with something that actually meets everything, all the agenda, all the environmental risks and everything, then we may have something, but I don't think any of it that's in front of me is it. So yeah, that's my key issues. But yeah, it's all risks led because that's the way I think. And of course, Ngāi Tahu at the table. I think that's the big key here. If Ngāi Tahu feels comfortable in a seat, I do too. And so that's a big indicator for me as well. So.
Thank you, team. I think you've got some good feedback. Do you feel like you've got good enough feedback to be able to progress that to getting us a paper by the 11th?
Yes, no, I'm happy with that.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. And one thing I just wanted to say is that I do fear that what is at risk, and Claire mentioned that, is that the local rural voice or identity is definitely being talked about around the country as well for other parts of the country in this. And so that's, as John mentioned, I've got a number of different hats that I play here. So there's a conversation happening around what the functions look like with DIA. We've got a conversation with the regional chairs and unitary mayors about that later today. And then we've got the Mayoral Forum. The Mayoral Forum is by and large of a similar view to where we are landing here, which is very pleasing to see that we're not on a limb here. We're not out on a complete limb. There's different views, obviously, within our vast, big region, but by and large, I think we're all wanting to make something work and make sure that the delivery, as was mentioned, is upfront. We all need to deliver, both TAs and the Regional Council. And the one thing that I am pleased about within our submission is that we talk about that we are not layer of government. We are a council that does regional functions. And that really needs to be impressed upon, is that we do have different functions to what a TA or a city council does. We are not another layer of government. There were layers of government, layers of planning within the old Resource Management Act, which would give us the assumption that regional plans, RPSs, then filter into a district plan. That is gone under the new Resource Management Act proposals or reforms. So the issues that have been talked about as being the issues of why they want this change is kind of moot in that point. But we do need to make sure that the legislation is changing, and some of the roles and functions of regional council has been legislated out. So that is why we do need to have this conversation. So it's not business as usual. It's not that we can keep doing what we want to do. We need to find a way to make sure that we deliver the functions and the services and the community expectations in an efficient way that communities want. So that's why we want to have that conversation, to design something that's useful for us. And then the rest of the country is going to have different conversations as well. So next week I'm up at Waitangi having conversations with people up there, so that the country lens can have a good view of this, because we can say what we want, but the government needs to land a piece of legislation that fits the whole country, and making that adaptable and workable is good. So we're going to move on to the next note, and you had a say before, so we're going to move on to the simplification for local government now. The Resource Management Act stuff.
Kia ora, thank you. And Councillor Cromwell, if you thought the last submission was long. We were dealing with several hundred pages of legislation over the break. So I won't need to remind you of the context around resource management reform and some of the, within these two bills, within the Planning Bill and Natural Environment Bill, and some of the key shifts that are within those bills, and some of the implications. Those are all outlined in our submission. We outline, or in our proposed submission, I outline on the next two slides some of the key points in the submission, some of the subheadings. I won't run through those in detail, but there are a number of them which we had discussions about before Christmas. And of course, the submission is based on your conversations that you've had before Christmas and the feedback that you've provided, and also the analysis that staff have put together. We've received feedback from you across the submission. It's summarised here. And I'll leave you to look at that slide. But at this point, noting time, Chair, I'll hand over back to you for feedback on the draft submission.
So who wants to start with some feedback? Megan, as the chair of the Strategy and Policy Committee, this is really within your wheelhouse, so I'll hand over to you first, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, so kia ora. First thing is to acknowledge the hard work and depth of thinking that the staff have done in a tight time frame and over the summer break, and overnight as well. Yeah. This is fantastic, and it does help shift some of my thinking, so thank you, really helpful. So from my perspective, there are three really significant philosophical shifts or underlying logic that between the old system, or the current system, the new regime. And I think it's really important that we clearly define, know what those shifts are, and then have a position on those shifts, because that's going to shape how we actually respond to the changes in practice here in Canterbury. So the first philosophical shift is that community voice is moving from many downstream opportunities from various perspectives across a range of stages, including the consent stage, to a fewer and more front-loaded voice into limits, national direction and spatial planning. And we have covered Tiriti and Māori voice really well and explicitly, but what I'm not quite sure about is whether or not we've landed our position on that fewer participants, fewer downstream opportunities, and more weight placed on upstream. And we have covered it, but the point that I think is important is because from my view, I think the RMA actually does get this right. I think that is where we should be having the discussion in those upstream conversations. But that only works if we actually get the design at that stage to be legitimate, which means the right people at the table, understanding how participation works, and clearly saying where accountability sits. So if we're really clear on that, then we can support that fundamental shift. The second is a move from an effects regime over into externalities. So under the old system, the core question was, what are the effects of a proposal, and can they be avoided, remedied, and mitigated to an acceptable level? And now we're shifting over into a model that's more towards outcomes and goals within limits framework. And everyone calls that the externalities model. That's where the environmental limits become the anchor of the system. We concentrate on cumulative effects. And through that, we actually have greater access to other models. I think adaptive management is greater enabled through the cumulative effects framework. And we should lean into that and say that we support those alternative models for adaptive management. But community voice, it actually only is, it falls, community only actually have a voice where a proposal comes that falls outside of a trigger or the notification thresholds. And I think that our submission needs to be more clearly expressed to say whether we agree with this high-level philosophical shift, and if we do, it comes back to the architecture of the legitimacy of the top-ended system, the front-loaded system. The third philosophical shift is that there is an opportunity for a shift in the allocation model. So traditionally, scarcity of natural resources has been managed on a first in, first served basis, which is imperfect, but we are familiar with it. And these reforms introduce a new allocation mechanisms, or a few of them, where it's stated to improve efficiency and certainty. It's put out that it's going to make it easier for farming communities and resource users, but I'm really concerned that it actually hasn't got that balance right, and it is not going to actually achieve that. Mm-hmm. I think it raises real questions when we move to a market-based system. I think there's equity issues for small operators, for new entrants, for communities where there's bigger players can come in and outbid smaller operators. And that will lead us to really wide social outcomes, like community resilience and food production security issues. And I think that if we're dealing with the philosophy of that we've got these three major changes, not the tinkering of the small bits, but the three major things, and we agree on those, then we'll be able to get the rest of it right. So they're my kind of gaps analysis. Touched on where we can make it more clearer. The only last bit that I think is important is to say it's not a gap, but I think that councillors' views will diverge, and we may want more discussion on two areas. The first is who sets the human health environmental limits and who sets the ecological environmental limits. And currently the settings are for national to do the health limits and regions to do the ecological limits. And I'm not sure that they actually can be pulled apart and separated and determined by different decision makers. So that's a discussion that we actually have to have. And the next is who leads the development of the spatial plan, who decides upon it, and when the environmental limits cannot be reached, who decides on the action plan that will allow the resource consent users to shift towards compliance within those limits. So I think they are the two tough conversations that we have to have, and if we can land on the philosophical shifts and then those two big kaupapa, then we will be well set to have a really well-informed and clear submission. And I think this document that you've pulled up overnight on the spatial plan actually does deal with that. The only part I'd say is if local authorities must decide who's going to be on the committees, then I'd also be saying, what about mana whenua and Runanga voice as well? So kia ora.
Ian? Oh, did you, staff, did you
no.
want to say something to that, or do you, you'll be able to pick up those points?
I think the thing, but I think the thing you raised, Councillor Mackay, is the desire for council to have a position on some of those balances. We need to be able to reflect what that position is, and we won't be able to provide that. So I encourage you through the Strategy and Policy Committee and some of the other conversations, if those are really key, to be able to dig through, to work with your colleagues on that position so we can reflect that.
Ian? Oh, sorry, Ian.
Look, I thought Megan gave a very good summary, synopsis, or what's the other word for crunching everything down into a very clear definition of the changes. And so if I go through 3 points, the first one is front-loading any discussion points in terms of consenting or resource allocation, and I think that's a good thing, because I look at the current process and it's got bogged down in hugely expensive and complex systems, so I think a change to that is a good thing. In terms of moving to effects for externalities, outcome goals with limits, when we were around the Land and Water Forum table, we advocated for that, and I think that's a good shift. And in fact, this council, the MPSs for fresh water reflected that, and that's a good thing. The shift in the allocation model, I think, has come out of ACT and the Treasury, and they've been talking about financial instruments for allocating what they say is scarce resources. What they fail to understand in New Zealand is water's not scarce. It's just not where we. If you just take it as where it's available, it sometimes runs out at critical times, but it's not a scarce resource. And so shifting to the Spanish allocation model is a stupidity that is hard to describe just how stupid it is. I've said that to Minister Hoggart. I'll say it again whenever I get to see him. I've said it to Treasury for probably the last 15 years, but they get bogged down with their own self-importance. It's an inappropriate model for New Zealand, and the first thing you do is, when you decide that water is scarce, is you limit the availability of it, because the people who own the water or have the financial instruments, who have the benefit from financial instruments, the first thing they need to make sure is that nobody else gets an allocation of water, because otherwise their investment in that in buying the water in the first place is valueless. So that's a nonsense. So first two, I think they're good changes. Last one is nonsense. In terms of setting the limits, again, I thought the process we went through for the Land and Water Forum, I'm not suggesting we reform the Land and Water Forum, but it was highly driven by the very best water scientists in New Zealand, and it was only corrupted when that advice, that scientific advice, was corrupted by activists and politicians rather than by genuine water scientists. So I think there are processes which New Zealand has used in the past to set limits, which is not hard to do. So that's my reflection. And so I think there are good things in this, and I think Megan's right. Those are the things we need to emphasise, and we should be very brutal about the stupidity of the third point about the water allocation methods.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I general agreement with Councillor Mackay and her thoughts, and Councillor Mackenzie, particularly around the allocation model. And I remember way back last century on an exchange to the United States, driving between Tucson and Phoenix, and yes, the water allocation was tied to land, but the city corporations bought the land up, so there was no agriculture between those two cities 100 miles because the land was bought up. And it just always sits in the back of my mind, the opportunity for the corporate world to take charge of and reduce the opportunity for others. And I won't say the family farmer, but in my mind, it does not work for me. First in, first served may not be perfect, but neither is the democracy that we have, but it's the best option we have at the moment. So a real nervousness there, but I otherwise generally agree with the tenor of the submission. And for me, I haven't got too bound up into it. Yes, there are issues with national health limits and regional limits, and I think we do need to have a wee bit of an ability to have a variation within catchments and the like, where there are obvious challenges to hitting a line. How can we best achieve or move towards, which sort of takes us back to 2017 and some of our CWMS work, accepting that we will not get to perfect. We will always be travelling towards it, but an absolute bottom line set somewhere nationally may never be achievable. What are the dislocations and the challenges to those communities, and if we cannot achieve? So it's not about attempting, but it's a recognition of where we might be able to land. So just having some of that ability to vary some of those numbers in different parts of catchments, but ensuring that we have no further degradation in the catchments that are in a really good place. I'll just sort of stop there, but I think it's otherwise we're in a pretty good place. Thank you.
Did I have Claire and then John?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I agree with the conversations that have been had, particularly Megan and Ian and John. I have provided my feedback, and I guess my concerns, I've diverged a little bit from the advice here, particularly around the environmental limits. So if that discussion is going to be had, I just, John sort of touched on it then a little bit around the environmental limits versus health, and taking the most restrictive one or protective one, I think is in the language that we've got in here. That, for example, on nitrates, that could be huge difference. If human health standards sits at 10.3 or even 5.6 versus an ecological or ecosystem, depending on what your attributes are set up around. So I'm just a bit concerned that we've come up with a recommendation here in that. I definitely disagree with it as written currently. Happy to have some more discussion with staff and be convinced, but that's my personal view. I think we also have a pushback against regional councils and decision-making setting limits are less stringent, but we know that under the current NPS for freshwater that there are a couple of attributes, particularly P, for example, where if you've got a geological area which is high in phosphate, you'll never meet it. Anyway.
Just for clarity, P is phosphate.
Yes.
Just for the people that might be listening online.
No. Not PEE.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Dion. So yes, and I think really, I guess my other one is around our comments in point 95, which is just around restrictions on controls. And I think if we actually think about what this government is trying to do, and it's providing some protection for private property rights as well as being an enabling legislation within limits, environmental limits. I do actually think that we need to be careful about the restrictions that can be placed if we've actually breached a limit. So, in other words, I don't think, and it goes back a little bit to what John Faulkner was talking about before, so much work's been done out of the CWMS and catchment groups and collectives, and there's a whole heap of work, and I just think if we start putting input controls or caps on before we do that non-regulatory stuff, not helpful. So,
John, and then Genevieve.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody's had a look at my comments, and I just want to make a little bit of an additional one. It's a point in some of the, and I agree with what Councillor Mackay, both Mackays, say. The use of some of the events that have happened in the past as potential argue points. In 18, you've got, it is essential that these drafting gremlins are fixed now before the bills pass into law. So everybody acknowledges MFE, the Regulatory Impact Statement report, everybody in Castelia, they acknowledge these gremlins. And they go, oh, we'll just fix them. And we all know that just fixing a policy or a planning thing is a very, very expensive process. And I look at our simple 10% rule mistake that the Hurunui Wai, our zone committee, made And I don't know, Stephanie, you might know the cost that incurred to ECAN, and in a financial sense, but it also was an enormous cost in a community sense. So something like that, for the government to say, oh, we'll just fix the gremlins, and I get into Mr. Mackenzie's camp there. The idiots up there don't know what they're talking about when they say it's simple. It's not simple. And I think we really need to push back on some of these things. It's a good submission, but as I said, the tone is not strong enough.
Genevieve.
No, thank you. There's some really good comments around the table, and I agree with quite a lot of them, actually. Just particularly environmental limits and human health, I think, need to be core. And if we start with that goal, or, I guess, attribute, then we will lead in the right direction. But if we don't get that right, then perverse outcomes will start flowing. And that's how I see it, because my key concern is that if we don't bind it and set it first, then we can't enforce, we can't be precautionary, and we can't enable effectively. We also do need to look at, specifically to Canterbury, we need to be real about over-allocation. And so a centralised allocation model may not apply as an equitable tool here, because water quality is one thing and water abundance is another. And if we have a polluted source of water that might be fit for one purpose, it's not necessarily a potable supply for human health. So that's why I talk about environmental limits and health limits need to be in the same, absolutely not decoupled. And to mana o te wai, yes, it's been removed in the past, it needs to be core as well. It's the hierarchy system. And that basically goes back to what I was saying. But my main concern is the centralised allocation model of water, especially if it's a market approach, will be very unique here in Canterbury because of the aforementioned issues we have with nitrates and the potability of our water in various areas. And if we don't get that right, then we're going to have a rife economy trading water, because it is scarce. And yes, we may have an abundance of water, but is it fit for purpose? So, yeah, that's my key things.
Thank you. I'm going to go Nick and then Andrea online.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Yep, agree with what you just said. So overall, the bills leave me concerned. Having two bills with different and often opposing goals operating side by side is less good than one integrated act like we have under the Resource Management Act. There's clear differences, and it'll be left to us to pick up the mess. We cannot afford to keep flip-flopping across governments. I agree, but changes need to be made to these bills to create a stable framework that recognises the importance of basic environmental protections. I broadly agree with our submission. Yep, broadly pretty happy with it. There's maybe one of those points on the screen that I disagree with, the second to bottom one. I disagree with that line of thought, particularly where it says place-based, community-led implementation is the optimum pathway. It's too idealistic and not pragmatic. In reality, what I've observed over 25 years working to protect and restore our rivers is that catchment groups get together and put a lot of good work into developing catchment plans, like we did through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy and the Christchurch West Melton Zone, and others have done in other zones. But then, when it's time for the rubber to hit the road and the community looks to the regulator to enforce the rules that they've collectively agreed on,
ECAN's management backs away from challenging the powerful, the big industries and agribusiness. So those with power, money and land are currently above the law and free to pollute the environment for the rest of us. And it's the failing of regional council's role as regulator that's the most significant issue and the thing that we can influence. So I'd reword that positively in the submission point to say something like, great collaborative community processes must be followed up with consistent compliance, monitoring and enforcement to give effect to community aspirations. Thank you.
Andrea.
Yeah, hi guys. Just three quick things. I keep saying I looked through both of the acts bills, and there's nowhere in either of them that has sustainable development. And every country we aspire to be like uses sustainable development as the way they do their planning and their building and protect their environment. So I really don't understand why they've taken, and it was all over the RMA. It was in there so many times. So I really don't understand why they don't have it in there. And is there any way we can say, guys, it's 2026. If we don't do this sustainably, like what we need and what the future people are going to need, what are we doing here? Anyway, there's that. The wording, this enhance word, that's one of the purposes of the environment bill. And enhance is from this point in time, we make it better. So that means the the shifting baseline, everything that's degraded, we're going to just fix it from now, but it really should say restoration. It should be restoration, not enhance. Anyway, and the other one is the grammar person in me. They keep putting one plan, one place, the letter one, the number one, when it should be written out one, because when you write, seriously, I know, and I'm thinking, these are like policy writers in Wellington, and they don't even know that you need to write the word out one. From 1 to 10, you write it out, and everything afterwards, you can put the number. Anyway, that we can't say that because that's going to piss them off, but it's not
You can be my grammar writer because I am totally bad with grammar, as you know, so you can be my new grammar writer for the council for the next few years. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any other...
Anyway, look, it's good. I'm happy, but I'm really worried about sustainable development not being in there. That's my main thing.
Okay. Nettles?
Thank you. A lot of work has been put into this, and really appreciate the level of detail. I'm nervous about the water allocation. Just want us to have another good look at that. Also the environmental and health limits, having different eyes across those, central versus regional. Why would that be? And in general, there is a lot of words. There are 144 points. By the end, I needed a Milo and a lie down. But I just think in the presentation of our final draft, it would be really good to have sort of the 3 or 4 big rocks as an executive summary at the start, because there's a lot of good stuff in this. And if I was receiving this, with the best will in the world, some good stuff could go down in the weeds. There are, I'm sure, listening to my colleagues, there's a lot of alignment, and we can find the 3 or 4 big things of which everything else will fall within. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Yayan?
Kia ora tātou. Nettles, you kind of took the words out of my mouth there. 144 points. Yeah, so thanks, Patrick, for some good bedtime reading. You put me to sleep a couple of times, so thank you. Tēnā koe. No, but I do think I'm really looking for the strategy and policy kind of that what Megan started off with, that high level, the architecture, teasing out a little bit more, especially those three points. and how we get there. And we've heard some support around what Councillor Mackay started with from around the table. So I'd really like to cover that forward. But I also, regarding the relationship with Ngāi Tahu, and looking up at the Crown apology behind me and some of the things there. So I'm really concerned that if the government continues going in this way, they'll create more treaty grievances. Because as you say that, in the submission here, you talk about the relationship with Ngāi Tahu, how it's built on Te Tiriti, but also you talk about the settlement that Ngāi Tahu have, the Ngāi Tahu Claim Settlement Act, and also the Turananga Ngāi Tahu Act, which is based on the current treaty clauses and other things, especially the principles, treaty principles, and Section 8 and Section 8 of the RMA and Section 4 of the Papatawhai. As one as well. So and also taking out any considerations of the treaty 6E, 7A, and 8, Section 33, and having those abilities. So that's how it's just making sure that I really agree with your points. Putting across that if they do take those out, that'll probably create more treaty grievances into the future, which that's what we probably don't want. Ngāi Tahu's gone through their Claim Settlement Act. They're happy to working with Environment Canterbury. That's probably one of the shining lights of relationships with councils throughout the takiwā of Ngāi Tahu, and then probably going down this way with removing all that out of the new 2 acts. We don't want to create more grievances. Kia ora.
We've got a minute. Well, no, we don't. Is it who hasn't spoken? It's on this particular one. It was Ashley and Sarah. I just want to get through people who haven't spoken. So, have you got anything you want to add?
Just want to support and reinforce what Andrea said about sustainable development. I think I made that point in my email that without sustainable environment, you don't have sustainable business, you don't have sustainable society, and I think that point needs to be made quite clearly.
Sarah?
Yes, and I also support that statement, and about the allocation that we've discussed, and I just also like to just raise the property rights issue and the compensation. Just that is, I think, it's going to lead to an enormous amount of litigation and cost and delays, and I just think it's leading to an enormous amount of problems for our resource management. Okay, thank you.
The 2 Johns are itching, so I'll go John and then the other John, and then we'll close off.
Yeah, mine's quick. I just want to withdraw my idiot comment there before. That was a bit impassioned. I'll say more misinformed.
Thank you. John.
Thank you. And this very briefly, I was desperately trying to think of the last thing I wanted to say. And for me, apologies, for me, this is the architecture that sits. And yes, we have some issues with it, but it is going to be the national policy statements and environmental statements, which will be the real drivers of what comes on. So yes, while we're focusing on the architecture, the real deal will be those policy statements that come out. That will be the challenge. And I also note the nervousness about the relaxation, but I also read in the legislation the not even expectation, the requirement that over-allocated catchments, whether it be abstraction of water or nutrients, will be resolved and pulled back. How that happens, I'm not sure that we can do it, as I said yesterday, by holding hands and smiling. There will be regulatory input, I suspect. How do we bring back into alignment? So there's some real challenges there and expectations that there will be an improvement into the future. So it's not all about relaxation of the rules. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Ian.
Well, look, I think Megan and Nettles, and they coincidentally chair and co-chair the strategy committee, are both right, and that the submission is long-winded. It doesn't focus in on the critical points, and I think it needs to be rewritten accordingly. That's not to say some of the points in the submission aren't valid, but I don't think it deals in too much detail, doesn't go to the high level, and give a very clear message to the government along the lines that Megan and Nettles were enunciating. So by the time we get to the committee meeting where we're being asked to approve that, I hope we can rewrite it along the lines that Megan first described.
No, I agree, and we did have that conversation as well yesterday around the submissions in general, about making sure that we punchy and get these points. And I think there's not too much dissent from the points that you raised there in your gap analysis, which was excellent. Thank you, Megan. So I think if we can frame some of those things up for the next time that we have a conversation, I think there's probably there will be an opportunity for councillors through the two chairs of the committee to have a conversation early next week, and we will start to try and populate that, or just to not to add anything in, but to make sure that we are making it punchy, that councillors are on board, they understand the implications, because this is the prize, or not the prize is the wrong word, but this is the most fundamental thing that we have to deal with in front of us. And as regional governors, we still have this role, and we still will have this role for a wee while. We will have a role to play in this change, and we need to make sure that we understand it and lead our TAs to help them understand some of the implications of what's in here as well, because it is a symbiotic relationship. We need to make sure everybody's on board. So thank you so much for the feedback, everybody. I think, staff, have you got enough on there to go away and do what you need to do for the next steps? Excellent. Anything you want to close off with? No. Thank you again, everyone. I think that's been very helpful, and getting everybody in to have this conversations around these three very important, they are important and they're big. So, I appreciate the way that everybody's worked together to make their points known. Can we just close off with karakia with the Deputy Chair?
Ka pai, kia tau ka me naki taka ka mea karo, ki ruku ki tēnā ki tēnā tātou. Ko mahi atu hua mā ki toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te reo. Tūturu whiti whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora tātou.